places out on the Ottawa Canal and the Manoa Stream, and I have watched the water for that period of time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the people on your committee for the Army Corps of Engineers are mostly based somewhere else. So they couldn't have had that actual, viewing experience that I've had and other people have had also. I'm thinking of Luciano Minervi, who's on, I see also, who would also lives in my immediate neighborhood. So we have exact information to start out with. Okay. Second of all, Eric, on the PBS Insights the other night, you seemed to mention that the Army Corps of Engineers is just about planning something appropriate for flood control. It's not actually going to be building it. And that would probably reside, I see Haku is online. They are probably in charge of the city and county actually producing the funds to actually build something. Am I correct on, I just want to ask that first question, then I'll go on with something else.
Yeah, yeah, I can answer that. So the current effort is the feasibility study portion of the project. So we engage in and finalize a feasibility study, and the outcome of that feasibility study is a recommendation for an action to construct a project. Now, our study ends, and then that recommendation goes to Congress. And so at that point, it is up to Congress to both authorize, meaning that they say, yes, go out and do the project, and then they have to fund, meaning provide money for the construction of that project. So the feasibility portion of any effort is mandatory, and it's always the first step to identify the action that will be undertaken, and then make that recommendation to Congress for authorization and funding for construction. I hope that answers your question, Laura.
Okay, if I can continue on. I've offered several suggestions how you could break this up into several different parts of a planning system, one being the easiest and least expensive that would secure the Mo'ili area. And that's what I'm speaking towards, because Sydney and Dave are the experts in the upper watershed area. I gave simple fixes, and they would be very quick to be undertaken by you breaking it up, breaking your proposal that will go to Congress into several different parts. The one I recommended as first is just simple berms, 3-foot berms at the most around Alawai School and Noelani School, and it could be around some of the other schools also, that the kids will love playing on, so it won't be any obstruction for them. And that is the most important part. And the part on our Mauka side of the canal, the most important thing is don't put any flood walls at all. Yes, the walls of the canal need some repair, but not anything major, because in the time, like I said, the 30 to 40 years that I've been watching the water, that very few times, maybe only 3 times when it comes up over the canal and the stream, it is set in very shallow ponds, and then it immediately percolates back into the, in other words, the ducks come and have a fun time in the little ponds, and then it immediately percolates into the ground surface. And so there's really no problem, because we have all of that is all set back, with only the Alawai clubhouse being immediately of concern, and that's all concrete foundation slab work, and I don't think that would be any problem at all for any water running into that area. So there's those are the first steps that could be taken on the Malka side. I may be taking up too much time, but on the Mackay side, I talked with some people that are tourists visiting and some people that are longtime residents visiting, and they cannot understand how anybody in the cash cow, the economic district of Waikiki, would want to go down Alawai Boulevard and be obscured from the mountain views and the water by 6-foot flood walls. And I have a suggestion for that, which is much more simple. and does not affect anybody's viewing pleasure, the view sheds, the view planes, whichever you want to call them, which I've tried to send out to people, which has to do with taking the just the simple 3 foot high wall that is in the more Mackay area of the canal, which is past Macaulay Bridge, and using the same design, except filling in the arches with stone and using native stone and running it along the whole side of the Waikiki district. There's, you're only dealing with the flood area, but, I think both Dave and Sydney have pointed out that any strong king tide or any hurricane is going to flood Waikiki anyway from the ocean side. And what they need to do is simply protect their elevator shafts and other lower story parts of the building. I think I probably spelled out an awful lot of stuff, but those are the easy fixes. Those are the things that don't require huge amounts of your basic, probably good engineering description. But since you're going to offer it as a plan, I would like to see you offer it as several stages of plans, of which the first one is the easiest one, as I've just suggested, which doesn't affect, all of the major concrete building. So I thank you for your time, and if you can comment, I'd appreciate it. Maybe Haku can come in on that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. This is Kelly Philbin, the technical lead speaking. So you bring up a lot of great ideas. I think you've brought them up as well in the past. We've captured them in the measure tracker as well. And so we have looked at a lot of them, especially the berms around the schools, and making sure that the children and other critical infrastructure are protected. I think that when we are doing this study, we're looking at a watershed solution, so not just protecting the schools. We do want to protect other community members as well. And so with that approach, extending the levee or flood wall idea, we wanted to look at all the communities and some of the underserved communities as well. If we raise the canal wall, the height of the canal wall on the Mackay side, we would have to do it on the Mauka side. If you raise one side, it'll just induce damages to another. And so that would make flooding on the Mauka side actually worse where you live if we only concentrated on one side.
No, it won't. Okay, sorry, more than 30 years I've been watching it, and it's just not happened in way more than 30 years. So it's not going to flood into areas that are really structurally built. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah.
So we're looking at it from a statistical standpoint, the frequency flow, kind of just looking at the data. And so you may not have seen in your lifetime a 50-year or 100-year storm, and statistically speaking, you probably wouldn't. And that's okay. And so I think that what we're trying to do with the study is we're trying to look at it from that statistical standpoint, that when that flood does come, you and your community are protected. But the simulations, the H&H modeling, the simulations do show that Mo'iliili gets flooded from several different sources. So it's not just from the canal, but it's coming down from the Noah Stream, where it jumps the bank at Woodlawn Drive, and also from the Makiki Stream. So there's several different sources of flooding for Mo'iliili. So definitely a complex system that the engineers were working with and trying to determine the best solution. And so I think that kind of summed up where we are with this proposed plan for the community.
So Laura, I also just think it's important to mention that, understanding that your historical understanding of the area is critical, and I'm not, and very accurate, right? Because you've lived there, you've seen it. But I also, as we look forward into the future and what our models are projecting in terms of flooding is showing, sea level rise and things like that that are outside of the historical norm that we've been witnessing, for the past 100+ years, right? And so I just wanted to declare, to make that statement that we are also incorporating things like sea level rise, and so the nature of flooding will change as we continue to move forward through kind of this century. So I'll stop there. Over.
I don't know if I don't think that the Makiki stream is going to really affect any outflow, because where it's located is as it is coursing to the water, the ocean. And I think that other people on the chat, I encourage Sydney to speak up with some of the things she's saying about why are the flood walls needed on the golf course. That's the same all along from almost Kapahulu Avenue all the way down. It's almost all park or open golf course space or whatever. So we really do not need flood walls at all there at all. Seriously. Yeah. But I hope some other people will speak on the chat too. I don't know who else is on there.
Thank you, Laura. And I'm going to jump in because Sydney, you had mentioned Kapahulu, and Sydney in the chat asked, in the previous iteration, there were no flood walls along the golf course on the Kapahulu side because stormwater was supposed to flow in there. And so there was one key change in our plan that kind of modified and altered how that entire system will work. So our plan also has flood walls extending all the way up the Manoa-Palolo Canal, essentially to the H1. And the reason when we did that, when we incorporated that, basically water from the Manoa-Palolo was coming out of the bank and then wrapping all the way around the golf course. And so essentially by including the flood wall all the way up the Manoa-Palolo Canal, we're stopping all of that water from kind of pushing out, wrapping around the golf course, and then needing to drain through the golf course. And so essentially we've kind of stopped that at the source. And a lot of that was, I think refined based on the updated modeling that we were able to achieve under this iteration. So I hope that answers your question, Sydney.
No, I think that you have to know that the water once upon a time jumped the small wall on Koali Lane, and all of the banks almost all the way down on the Manoa Stream, going all the way down from the convergence of the Palolo and Manoa streams, are almost all probably about 10 feet up above the water level at this particular point. So there's not really any major concern. And if it's just transferred, the water is just transferred by a Y that goes into the golf course, that's going to take care of it as a detention basin and just let it flow out as it will.
So I know that there's some back and forth going on in the chat about that design, the details of the design, and we can certainly circle back on it, Laura, and others. If you have input on it, I want you to recognize that there's a conversation going on, and there are a couple of questions in here, but I also want to honor Jason DeMarco, who has a digital hand up, and invite you to speak up. Thank you, Laura. And Jason?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, sir, we can.
Oh, excellent. Oh, there's my camera, it just popped on. Thank you for these outreach meetings and soliciting folks' input. And my question to the design team is relating to kind of just the fundamental approach to this project, in the sense that, how shall I phrase this? Would it be more advantageous if we could find locations like the golf course or the park or detention ponds along Manoa Stream that would allow for dissipating these potential floodwaters, as opposed to trying to completely channelize them? Just have in my mind that when Army Corps has come in and channelized these streams and rivers in the past, I'm thinking of places like Houston and New Orleans, that whilst we design with tolerances built into the flood level waters, eventually we may have an event that overloads the system, leading to even more catastrophic uh, results than if we hadn't channelized it in the first place. So could you speak for just a little bit about the thought process of channelization versus trying to dissipate over some of these parkscapes that we may have available?
So
Sure, I
thanks.
can.
Oh, Kelly, you go ahead. You go.
Okay. So yeah, we did look at several different locations where we might be able to retain water during an event. As you know, there's not that much green space in the watershed, and so there were several parks that we did look at. There's also underground storage that we looked at, but at the end of all of our analyses, there just wasn't enough storage available in order to have an impact, like remove enough water from the system to have an impact further downstream. So I think in the final array, we did have an alternative that included several detention parks, and it was Manoa, Palolo. We looked at Makiki. I'm not even quite sure if it made it to the final array, but we did have one that looked at storage and retaining water. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't as effective, and it also wasn't the NED plan. However, we are utilizing the golf course as using detention or retaining that water in order to offset some of the timing of the peak flows. So absolutely agree with you. We did look at not channelizing, so we looked at a lot of other measures. And if I'm not sure if you are aware or not, we have a measure tracking spreadsheet that's been posted to the website. There's also another sort of iteration which follows our plan formulation process, which shows those measures that made it through, and we didn't screen out how they've worked themselves into alternatives. So all that should be on the website as well if you haven't, if you wanted to look at some of those initial results. But I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. For keeping the water in the system for, say, a much higher event than the system can actually hold, we analyze that flood events from, the 2-year storm to the 500-year storm, and we are not allowed to induce any damages, which means from not having our project in place to having our project in place, we're not allowed to increase or induce any flooding. So we do look at that, and we make sure that we mitigate for any induced damages so that that does not become an issue for the project being in place. And I guess, Eric, if you wanted to expand on that.
The only thing I would say on top of that is that, so Kelly mentioned the detention basins at the Manoa Valley District Park and the Makiki District Parks, but we also looked at trying to divert water from the channel, so upsizing existing storm water infrastructure, essentially creating tunnels, through the system. So we looked at ways to reroute water, to store water, and ultimately all those through the technical analysis we did were screened out for one reason or another. And so, yeah, I do just encourage you to go to that plan formulation and management measure tracker on the website.
Thank you for answering my question. I'm sure you've thought about this and answered this question many times before, and maybe feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again, but appreciate your humoring a new voice with the question.
Jason, I want to say I appreciate you asking the question, even if it is one that's been asked before, and I know that other people appreciate it too. If anybody has joined for the first time since they saw the PBS, interview on Friday that, I think that one of your answers to natural and nature-based features, Eric, talks about the challenge of working within the space that's available. And I think speaking to the idea of trying to balance the flood walls and flood barrier concepts with given the space that you have to work in. So I just want to say don't worry about asking the same question that might have been asked before. Thank you, Jason, for asking it. I want to draw attention really quickly to a couple of things I've seen in chat. If I'm missing anything, please be patient with me and feel free to repeat it in chat or say, take a look, Hunter, you missed my question. But I did, I think Laura first mentioned something about who all is actually in Honolulu or in the area, and I think that there are several PDT members. We're also, inviting these talk stories to be the place where we can gain information from people who see this every day. So your participation in this is welcomed. As far as USACE PDT members, project delivery team members, yes, there are folks distributed. I'm in Sacramento, California myself. So I think that there was an answer to to your direct question. There are a few team members who are whose residence is there. I think that there was a comment about sea level change, sea level rise considerations. It was pretty. I think Dave, you might have mentioned something with a lot of technical, uh, uh, digits and dots. And I think there was an answer coming from Kelly regarding sea level rise considerations. That conversation going back and forth is important. But if we need to circle back on that for clarity, please type another chat. Winston mentioned something about planning for a 50-year storm rather than a 100-year. And I know, Eric, you did a really good job of trying to explain the annual chance exceedance event and percentages and, just how we are plan formulating. And you may want to speak to that here, or you may want to chat or both. But I want to mention that. And then finally, that's what I'm seeing in the chat so far, just articulating what I'm seeing, especially for the folks on the phone only. And I do see that there's a hand up from Mike Elhoff. So if you'd introduce yourself, ask your question or make your comment, and I appreciate the hands going up, and I'll call on you in that order. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Hey y'all, so thanks, and Hunter, hi, I haven't met you before. I wanted to ask the Eric and Kelly, I noticed that the 345 million was basically sent back to Congress, and we have 3 million to work with right now. Is that correct?
So whenever the project initially, did have 300 and some odd million dollars for construction. However, whenever they went through the pre-engineering design phase and it was determined that that plan would not function as designed, they do have to redistribute those funds, and they redistributed those funds from that funding source at the time to other projects throughout the country that needed those funds at the time. But they did allocate, understanding that we would have to undergo a general reevaluation to take another look at the problem and try to identify a solution that would function appropriately. That's when they did allocate $3 million for this study specifically. Now, again, you bring it up that the recommendation of this study will then again have to go to Congress for authorization and funding.
Okay, great. So in essence, we've hit the reset button as far as losing funding. If what you said is basically, yeah, the funding got reallocated. So the funding's gone. The explanation that I saw over the last 2 to 3 years about why we're not incorporating coastal storm surge, tsunami, and sea level rise directly into this, because I don't live in this area, but if I lived on LOI Boulevard or on Date Street, I would be significantly concerned that nothing on the website says, hey, by the way, you're still going to flood, because if anybody doesn't think we're going to get hit with a hurricane or a sea level rise isn't coming, then they're kidding themselves. So I don't know what the percent chance of a hurricane hitting the south shore of Oahu is, but I've seen it come very close a couple times. I haven't seen, in Laura's defense, I have not seen the LOI come close to, I wasn't here in 1960, but I haven't seen that, but I rest on the data and the statistics, so I'm not disputing the statistics. But the point is if I live in this area, I'm gonna wanna know, am I gonna flood or am I not gonna flood? And back 2 years ago, it was like, well, Congress didn't allocate money to address coastal and sea level rise directly into this. So our hands are tied. And everything I've told the city and legislators and the community was, hey, the Army Corps' hands are tied. And so I wasn't trying to blame you guys for a non-holistic solution. I was actually pointing out the root cause. And then I went to Senator Schatz and I said, hey, by the way, you might want to give the Army Corps a bigger scope in which somebody living in Date Street would know that I'm not going to flood because they've addressed all of this holistically. So that's my first point is, hey, we hit the reset button on the funding. So why not you guys go back to Senator Schatz and Congressman Case and say, hey guys, you kind of handcuffed us. We are only looking at Riverine. Can we get, this reallocated to look at all three? So that's my first point. The second is that there was a whole bunch of measures from the forest to widening the McCully Bridge, to digging the canal deeper, to adding pump gates, to dealing with storm drainage in the surrounding areas. I haven't seen any of that in black and white that the community could understand. I understand you're in draft mode. I understand there was a screening process, but my job is to tell you guys as an engineer and as a community member, I think you're going to get, and the city's going to get a lot of headwind all the way to the finish line if we don't start to put these things that were screened out in black and white in terms that the community can understand and see, okay, because it's easy to say it was screened out and we did modeling and yeah, the dredging helped a little bit and widening this helped a little bit and the erosion and the forest helped a little bit, but collectively they didn't get us where we need to be. That's what I'm hearing. But there's a lot of skepticism, and the way you deal with skepticism is with community-based graphics, videos, data, presenting the data in terms that the community can understand. I would argue that collectively, all those other measures would significantly reduce the height and need for flood walls. And certainly that we're not going to get rid of this water if it's at a higher elevation. If you're in Waikiki or Date Street and the canal walls are holding water upwards, the storm drains are useless. You're having to put check valves to keep the canal water from going into the streets. It's raining in Date Street and Waikiki, and there is nowhere for that water to go. You've got sea level rise, there, king tide during this event, you got nowhere for that storm drain to go. So the canal was designed to drain, and we're using it as a buffer, which means the elevation goes higher, and physics says goes higher, everything in the surrounding area is stuck. That water is just going to sit there, and God forbid we get a 3 to 6 foot storm surge and it hits this wall and the storm drains have check valves in them. Where is that water going to go? So thank you. That's what I got to say. I love you guys. I'm not trying to fight you. I'm trying to give you perspective.
Mike, I appreciate that. I think Eric indicated he wanted to give some answer first to reaction to that, and then also maybe call on Kelly. Eric?
Yeah, so I know, Mike, and I, again, appreciate the comments, and we really appreciate your continued interest and willingness to come to these meetings. So just to touch on a few things, you're correct in that, currently our study is a flood risk management study, and in the Army Corps of Engineers, flood risk management is defined as riverine flooding. So flooding, originating from the mountains and coming down and flooding from the stream channels themselves and the Alawai Canal. And so I know I've said this before, and I know you understand this, Mike, but just for those folks that are new to this study and new to these meetings, we are required to incorporate how sea level rise and how changes in tidal levels influence that riverine flooding. And so when we model flood risk along the Alawai Canal, out to 2080, we are incorporating that sea level rise and those changes in tide and understanding and trying to understand how those things exacerbate flood risk along the Alawai Canal and the surrounding streams. And so when I was mentioning to Laura earlier that, we do incorporate that into the flooding that we're modeling and talking about and protecting or trying to build a plan for isn't the same as the flooding that has been experienced in the past, and it will not continue to be the same. And I know you know that. I just wanted to make sure that I said that for folks that weren't necessarily in this. Now, it is my understanding, and Cindy, maybe you can correct me, or somebody else from the Honolulu district, that there has been some funding allocated and set aside for looking at coastal storm risk management in Honolulu. So I believe that there are efforts that are underway, through the senatorial processes and things like that, to look at that effort. Now, what I always say is that when we look and we talk about flooding, we're talking about probability. And so we run analyses looking at what's the probability of, and this kind of gets to Dave Watase's question earlier, what's the probability of a flood, like of a hurricane happening during a king tide? Or what's the probability of a hurricane and I guess that's a good example. What's the probability of a very large rainstorm happening during a king tide event? And we look at kind of the historical tidal levels and when these things happen. We have to look at probabilities, right? And so, if we designed or built something for every potential problem, we would be building even greater, even bigger. And so we try to use the data to inform a plan. And this kind of gets at to Hunter's discussion earlier. What we're really trying to do is identify the optimal plan. And when we say optimal, in the past it was a 100-year event, right? So the previous plan was kind of built or designed to, I'm not supposed to use this, but protect against the 100-year, the word protection is something we try to avoid, but protect against the 100-year event. Right now, though, the team is kind of tasked with identifying that optimal plan. So it's the plan that maximizes benefits, whether they're economic benefits, benefits to other social effects like reductions in risk for more vulnerable populations or things like that. So we capture a lot of benefits and we try to find that plan that maximizes those benefits while minimizing cost. And so again, it's the biggest delta, the biggest difference between cost and those benefits. And so in essence, the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't go in and say, well, we're going to design to a 100-year storm, or we're going to design to a 50-year storm, or 25-year. We don't design to a specific storm. We go in and so we've made some assumptions right now. We have 6 feet flood walls. That's just an assumption right now to help us identify, what we believe is the recommended plan to be. And then we'll go and we'll optimize that plan. And when we optimize that plan, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, well, what if the flood walls aren't 6 feet high, or 4 feet high, or 5 feet high, or 7 feet high, right? And then we go in and we find that level that maximizes those benefits per unit cost. And it could be something that's not even so we're not seeking a specific storm event. We're trying to maximize those benefits per unit cost. And so I forget what you had said that kind of led me down that rabbit hole.
It was basically that, the public, I don't know if you sense the headwind, but I do. And I've seen it, and I've been on a lot of calls, and I'm not trying to be headwind. I'm trying to give you guys perspective that nobody wants walls. And and then the other point was, if it's a 1-foot wall or an 8-foot wall, it's still going on the assumption we're going to allow that canal to go up. We want to allow that canal to go up. And every foot we allow it to go up is a foot that the surrounding areas cannot fight against when they need to evacuate water. And the point about the king tide and the hurricane, the exact same thing happened in New York City. It's Hurricane Sandy, New Jersey. And so they are taking measures to address exactly that. We are not. And so I just want that. I want the community to go to their legislator, to go to Senator Schatz and Congressman Case, because I don't live in this area, and I want them to help you. And if they can help you and say, oh, Army Corps' hands are tied, this is a real threat. It happened in New York City. And, you know, people aren't going to, in New York City, they have a different perspective because it happened to them. So I get the percent chance. To Laura's point, she doesn't think there's a very high percent chance of this thing going 3 feet into people's over the top. But Kelly's point, the data shows it will. So I'm trying to, this entire time I've been trying to give an engineering perspective to the community and give you the community's perspective and try to bridge that. It doesn't look like it's going in the right direction. And I think the reason is it was never scoped properly. So I accept everything you just said, Eric, but it doesn't change the community's perception. And the mayor has to answer the community. And if they're fighting him and they're fighting you, that's not great. And so I think if you can address those measures upstream and show how the little effect fixing the forest had, how little effect dredging the canal had, how little effect widening the Cully Bridge had, and then you add them all up and the total subtracting from the wall height, now the community can start to see, this is why they're having to go up 6 feet. Well, what if we did this? So you've gotten a lot of the what if we did this, and that's what your screening process was. But in the screening process, the community's like, well, they screened it out, so I guess that's just the way it's going to be. So that's my perspective, and I don't really need you to answer it. I just need you to all see where that headwind's coming. And unless it's addressed, the city, the legislators, and you guys are all going to see it. We don't want walls, and walls mean graffiti, and walls mean the canal's never going to get fixed, and it's always going to be toxic. Let's go the other way. Let's make an amazing body of water that we can work with the Sahupua'a. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, Mike, I appreciate that. And, you know, I think something you said there kind of brought me full circle with your original comment of putting things in means or in ways that are readily understandable. And so you kind of hit the nail on the head that, you know, if you add all those things up, right, for example, the watershed management and the reforestation, when you're even talking about like a 20-year storm, it's not even discernible in the data, right? You can't tell that it actually had no meaningful or observable effect in the modeling, right? And so I guess my point is that we can, you know, I understand your point is that if you add all those things up and you show what it would do, then all of a sudden people may understand, well, why we have to build walls. And so I take that as a good way to think about how we can convey that information to the general public and as to why the decisions that we have made have been made the way they have been. Sorry, that last statement was kind of...
Put a metric with that forest absorption, erosion, and debris as well. The erosion and debris are having a negative impact on both ability to carry water, clog points, debris fields, detention. So it's not just absorption. It's especially when you go above a 20-year storm. Now we're talking about albizia, invasive trees, and soil just completely coming down that mountain. So yeah, that's exactly my point, Eric. It's just if you point it out to people, then they can start to see what impact it had instead of just being screened out. And then collectively, what if we did every one of these measures, even the Swift tunnel, if we just did a mini Swift tunnel and it's going to cost $1 billion. So do you guys want to spend $1 billion in a Swift tunnel? Because it will reduce our need for walls, but it's going to be $1 billion. So that's the kind of thinking the community needs to see is what's the cost of it. I know you guys are doing it internally, but it's not again, I'm not speaking for the whole community. I'm just trying to tell you what I'm hearing and week after week, month after month. And it's going to come to a head when this report's finally done and say, look, we did our homework. We did all the screening. We did all the modeling. This is what you get, community. And that's when things can go derail and people are out there with signs protesting. So let's avoid that.
Yeah, sorry, this is Matthew Johnson. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. So based on everything this gentleman just said, and I do very much appreciate that informed perspective, maybe that this would be a good time for me to put in my less informed questions. And it's basically two. I was wondering if in your, and I'm sorry, I'm going to just interject so you understand the context I'm coming from here. I really do understand and appreciate that you guys are tasked with something that's very important and deals with public safety and, lives and property. And I do understand you've taken this very seriously, and I put in more work than I can probably ever know. My two questions are, in the process of looking at, like the Alawai golf course as a, was it a flood basin or what, a drainage? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure the word. I'm not an engineer, but it seemed like the Alawai golf course was considered for a place where the water could absorb. Did you also consider the other areas of largely open land? And I don't know if this would involve a safety issue, but Kaimuki High School and the park, Alawai Community Park, along the way, the green areas there. Question one. And second question is, do you really think, because I don't know the numbers, do you really think the Alawai Canal would have 6 feet of water in it at some point over our heads of walking on the sidewalk?
So if I understood the first, I'll go ahead, Kelly.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so the most recent, so we have been, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting this evening, we have been working to update and do some final engineering analysis and revise the plan slightly. And so the current plan does incorporate the flood areas along the Alawai Canal to kind of increase the storage. And it also would set the flood wall back so that folks could utilize that park space and then enjoy, and be able to see the canal as well. And so I think that serves multiple purposes. So I hope that answers your first question. If not, you can clarify. And then the second, Kelly, maybe you might be able to do a better job of explaining it than I, but from a non-engineering perspective, right, when you put walls around the canal, well, I guess without the walls, the floodwaters expand out over a very broad area, right? But whenever you put flood walls, essentially you're taking that broad area away and you're keeping it in a much smaller, spatially confined area. And so it does, the walls do need to go up in order to, I guess, contain the same amount of water and just less space. And so, again, I don't know if that answers your question. I'll turn it back over.
Well, first of all, it didn't. I would like clarification. Did you say that I'll take it a piece at a time since you understand what I'm going for now. So you guys did consider the Alawai Community Park and those green areas along the canal as partial flood basins, and I'm not sure what you thought of like Kaimuki High School and all its track and green area.
Yes. So the current plan incorporates those areas as additional, I'll call them storage areas along the canal. We also we are proposing utilizing the Kaimuki High School field, a large part of it. And that serves two purposes. Again, it acts as a little bit of additional storage, but then I think, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, it does help water move into the Alawai golf course, which is more of a basin. It would have berms and would store water that way.
I see.
Kelly?
Sorry, I'm trying to answer the chat at the same time. So yeah, we did incorporate, the Alawai Community Park, Kaimuki High School, any of the green spaces that do exist. And for some of it doesn't make sense to design it as necessarily like a detention basin, like excavating or providing long-term storage, but it was used to hold more water just by being able to increase conveyance within the system. So we did look at those areas specifically, but for detention or like retaining water for a longer period of time, it didn't make sense from a hydraulic standpoint. And I guess what was the other saying you needed clarification
the other
on.
question
I do
was.
apologize.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I
So
said
my
I do
other-
apologize.
If that question was to me, my other question, I mean, just clearly, I mean, you know, and I think even you folks would probably agree. I mean, unless you just, you know, unless you have a strong appreciation for engineering marvels like walls and stuff, and I don't mean that sarcastically. I assume that even you folks would appreciate if we didn't have to build walls. And so my question was, do the numbers, the calculations show that we really would have 6 feet of water in that canal at some point?
Yes, so it can because we're keeping water in the system from many different sources. So any of the water that, you know, maybe would jump bank typically on Manoa Stream and flood the university. If we're placing a flood wall there to keep that water in the system, that just adds more water to the lower watershed. So trying to tackle all the different sources of flooding in the lower watershed just keeps more water in the system. So yes, absolutely, there could be 6 feet of water. There could be more than 6 feet of water. So we're not going to be able to protect to, you know, the 5,000-year storm. I know I'm not supposed to use these terms, but we can't protect to some infinite storm. We can only do, you know, what the benefit to cost ratio tells us, all of our policies, but certainly 6 feet, it could be more than 6 feet at some point.
Yes. And so I'm sorry, just while I have while I have the floor, I just have a final question, and that is, to what extent, you know, you're just looking at a Google Maps or even the slide that you guys had distributed in the PowerPoint, aerial photograph of the whole area, this whole area of you know, Honolulu that is affected. A lot of it, you know, reflects light back up. It's white. It's hard surface, and you know, even in my own neighborhood, I noticed that there's sometimes a preference for developers to just, you know, cut down all the trees, in particular like monster house builders. It just seems there's a strong preference to just cut down every tree and pave over the whole thing so they can pack as many cars in there as possible. Has there been any consideration of building code or legal changes that would take us back to a requirement to keep more green space in like all the little areas, you know, that add up, as you guys say, that pour in to the current drainage areas, that would reduce some of this? Shopping centers, you know, commercial buildings, streets. I mean, porous parking lots. I mean, I know there was some experimentation with parking lots that would more readily absorb water at a point in time. So, I mean, and you know, for individual home lots.
So Matthew, this is, I think you mentioned your name is Matthew.
It is.
This is Hunter. And I'll just put a little plug in here at nearing the top of the hour, because we usually set aside an hour. I'm glad for it to go over for a little bit, especially because we have so many folks joining us. But your question and your comment points to an idea of what locally there is or is not yet in place in terms of ordinances and so forth. There was also a mention earlier in the chat having to do with operations and maintenance and what happens for cleanup after a flood and so forth. I think in both of those cases, it's really a local matter, and so the city is here, city and county, and so I don't want to put you on the spot, Haku, but if you want to introduce yourself, you can make mention of either of those comments or questions, and correct the record if someone answered it incorrectly on the chat. But I wanted to give you the chance to introduce yourself. I also wanted to point out, Laura, I do see your hand is up. Mike, I don't know if your hand is up still as a leftover. Laura, and I see Robert Fox's hand is up. Once again, I want to honor the hour that we've set aside, and if folks have to depart at the top of the hour, please kind of say again anything you'd like to in the chat before you leave. And we'll get through as many questions as we can. But Haku, do you want to speak to either of those topics?
So I apologize. I was was in a conversation with Sydney in the chat about the budget. I've been kind of going through the operating budget to look for some information. What was the specific question?
I'll give it. Yeah,
Go ahead.
so I was, just looking at aerial photographs of the area, the whole area in question. I heard the comment that there are sources of, floodwater from many areas. Clearly, the whole area is largely hardened surfaces, shopping centers, buildings, individual residential lots. And there's been a preference for some developers, in particular monster house developers, to just cut down all the greenery in an area and cover it with parking spaces, or hard surface. Has there been any discussion as part, to alleviate the input of water to implement ordinances or any other legal changes or building code changes that could require more green space that would absorb water before it ever gets to these areas?
Yeah,
parking lot
there have been
surfaces.
So yeah, sorry, I'll introduce myself. My name's Haku Millis. I'm the director for the Department of Design and Construction. We've been working very closely with the Army Corps through this planning effort. Your question is actually more geared towards our Department of Planning and Permitting, right? So they're the ones who would kind of enforce and create those regulations that would allow, or I guess disallow, developers to completely pave or put in hardscape for an entire property, right? They're the ones that require considerations be made for what we call low impact development, right? We have to have greenscapes. We have to accommodate not just the quantity of stormwater that comes off of a site, but also the quality. There has to be some kind of treatment. And so those things are definitely in place and are critiqued regularly by the Department of Planning and Permitting.
All right, so I should take it up with them.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest, looking into the regulations when something is submitted for development, all of the strenuous, stringent design requirements that go into it. It's very difficult. I worked on the private sector for almost 15 years, and it's not easy to just say I want to pave and build a house. A lot of considerations have to be made in dealing with stormwater.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And yeah, the other thing, Haku, was just the maintenance question, and you can certainly track on chat. I know you've been engaged in that. So I do see two hands up. Laura, if it's okay with you, I heard you at the beginning today, and I'd like to call on Mr. Fox, Robert Fox, but again, going to keep the door open, keep the floor open here. If people have to exit, thank you for being here. Take a look at this continued slide for if you have further questions, but I'll leave that there. Ask Mr. Fox first, and then Laura after that.
Thank you, Hunter. I appreciate the time. Can you hear me? Good.
Yes, sir, and good to see you.
Thank you, Hunter. I appreciate that. I've been to a number of our meetings, and usually most of the time is taken up by presentation by the Army Corps of Engineers, which is not real helpful at this stage of the game. I have to address a couple of things which have been stated. Number one, that if you're depending upon the city Department of Permitting and Planning to control anything like FAR or permeable soil, it's not going to happen. We had 5 people indicted by the federal government for corruption in that department, and I was part of turning those people in. I'm pretty fierce. But the fact is that we have monster homes all over this island. Today, we're having an argument in court about a monster home in Kaimuki. The point being, one's next door to my house. They cemented the entire lot. And when the rain hits, normal rain, it's 6 inches deep when it runs off, overwhelms every storm drain, everybody else's properties. I'm concerned about this flood plan that you've got because, number one, you don't know our islands. I think it's really important for you to listen to people who know our islands here. For instance, you probably never have heard about the Mo'iliili Caves. Duh. When they built the Regency Tower, they threw 30,000 tons of cement into the ground to stabilize the foundation. In doing so, they blocked the Mo'iliili Caves. That originally was a natural overflow flood protective situation, naturally made, where the water, when it exceeded a certain level in the Manoa Stream, went underground and went out to sea. Now, it occurs to me, we need to be more creative in our thinking. Number one, if you're going to alter something at the Pololo Stream, Manoa Stream convergence, clearly whoever built that didn't have a brain in their head, because it's a 90-degree angle coming in. And so the Pololo comes in and it cuts off flow of the Manoa Stream. So of course it rises in a flood situation. So I think common sense tells me that we need to re-angle that convergence at 45 degrees so that the vectors are going in the same direction. Now you've got the same problem with the Manoa Stream into the Alawai. It is a 90-degree angle entry. Of course it's going to flood, because again, the Alawai Canal has no flow. It is a flat surface, non-moving water. And that's why it's so stagnant, and we have horrible fish and all kinds of horrible stuff in there. So I'm again suggesting that common sense in a purely business frame of reference is that we angle the Manoa Stream going in with a very high berm into the Alawai at a 45-degree angle outwards towards the entrance of the canal. Now, I know you guys already have your minds made up about this 6-foot wall thing. I got to tell you something. You're going to be fought tooth and nail by all of us if you ever decide to put 6-foot walls on the Alawai. Number one, it would be so counterproductive economically because it ruins some of the visuals of Waikiki. It's really important for the commercial development of Waikiki. We're so committed to visuals here on this island that we banned billboards. You guys who are on the mainland, and God bless you, I understand that you live on the mainland. You don't realize the commitment that we've made here on this island to prevent blight visually. So you will never see a billboard on the islands of Hawaii. Also, we have something called the outdoor circle. We preserve the trees of Hawaii. That's why when you're seeing hotels, you'll see they're surrounding a tree because we honor the trees. We have for years. And this kind of commitment is pretty telling when it comes to how we are going to react to you. If you think you are going to cement the Manoa Stream and you're going to cement the Alawai with 6-foot walls, I'd hate to think of the conclusion of what would happen publicly. So I really, really honestly think what's missing here is a connection with historical narrative. I don't think you've reached out to our kapuna, our elderly. You know, I'm one of those elderly, thank you very much. But particularly Native Hawaiians who have lived in the Manoa Valley, lived in Makiki, lived in Pololo. We can tell you what our problems have been. I was there when the flood of 2004 happened across the street from my house. I'm very clear about it. And it's an easy solution if anybody would think outside the box. The reason it flooded was not the bridge at Woodlawn. There's an S-curve in the Manoa Stream. The state happens to own all that land. If we just straightened out the stream and made a berm 20 feet tall, make it green, make it, whatever, and prevent the water from going south towards the Hamilton Library, the water would go directly to the gulch, which is the edge of the university campus. Once it gets there, it's not going to flood outside of those 30-foot high walls of the gorge. But again, we're talking about really more natural solutions. And I mean, you can predicate a 1,000-year flood if you want to, but we've never had such a ridiculous situation here. We've had a flood in 2004 and a flood in 2006. We learned some things from that. One is, which bothers me, that we have no money for maintenance here, because I met personally with Randall, who is head of our maintenance for the city and county of Honolulu. And he said no money had been allocated at all for maintenance. And why is that important? Because we, volunteers, go down the Manoa Stream and we pull the small albizia trees out. That was what blocked the Woodlawn Bridge. There a tree that was brought in from the Solomon Islands. They're not native and they're very fragile and they break easy in a storm. So what happened was the Albizia trees propagate amazingly quickly. And if we don't have a maintenance team that's going to go up the Manoa Stream to pull them out, because if you're depending on people to do that, I think then you got your wrong plan here. When you're building something, like even a condominium association, you have to build into that plan money for maintenance. If you don't, and a developer, by the way, with the TPP, that is a requirement of development that you have a maintenance program until you have enough owners in a condominium association to take over control and create their own association. I'm a broker in 2 states of the union and I work with the Securities Exchange Commission. So it's not like I'm stupid on this stuff. So I'm appalled that we have no money whatsoever going towards the maintenance of the Manoa Stream, particularly Albizia trees. If they go too big, it costs over $10,000 a tree to remove them. And yet, you guys aren't thinking of any of that stuff. What is the main cause of flooding of the Manoa Stream is the backup of the bridge and the woodlawn area. And that was because of these invasive species trees. It's our fault, and they were brought in purposely to repopulate the mountains of Oahu, because at one point, commercial development cut down every tree in the island of Oahu for sandalwood. So we know the history. We know bad decisions can have absolutely horrific impacts for generation upon generation upon generation. And that's why we're showing up to meetings like this, to give you some input. I'm really frightened here because I see that you keep on this same track, like you've got some metric in Washington, D.C. that somehow is better than local knowledge of our islands. Let me tell you something. None of you people live on this island. I've lived here for 40 some years. Since 1976, I've lived on this island. I've given my life to this island. And I'm still learning. But without any kind of deep communication, you're going to put up those 6-foot walls in the Alawai and we are going to go crazy on you. Manoa is the most politically powerful valley in the entire state of Hawaii. So when you start doing crazy things that don't make sense, we're going to react. And we're doing our best to give you all the information we can. P.S. Back to the Malilili Caves. If in fact that was such a great plan, which worked since Kamehameha III forward, of removing a flood risk in the Manoa, maybe what we should do, because we still have an entrance to the Malilili Caves on the Manoa Stream, we should put in a 6-foot pipe, like we had pipes in the Alawai at one time for the sewer replacements. Why don't we make a pipe, follow the original route, which is, by the way, not on anybody's property. It's right adjacent to the stream, and it went under the Alawai, actually, out through Kapahulu Avenue. At one point, historical here, that entire area was underwater. We had an island there called Makee Island. Everybody forgets the historical context here. But if that pipe were constructed in such a way with a certain slope, it would velocitize the water out to sea, and it would take a good 25 to 30% of the water flow out of the Manoa Stream and Palolo convergence. I just think, has anybody even thought about doing that? It just makes common sense to me. So I'm sorry to go on so long, but it's like, I'm really concerned. You guys, you're not listening to the historical minds of this island. Thank you.
Take Ellen's comment first, please.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do want to respond, Mr. Fox. I appreciate your comments and appreciate your, attending these meetings and then providing them. Kelly, I'll try to answer some of the specific measures, solutions that he mentioned, and if I get anything correct or incorrect, just correct me. So you had mentioned looking at the entry angles for multiple streams, and we did look at those. We looked at the entry angle for the Makiki stream as well as the entry angle for the kind of the Manoa Palolo confluence. And so, we did look at those, we modeled those, and they did not have any significant reduction during kind of, the events that drive risk in the community. So like the 20+ year events, they didn't have really any effect on or major reduction in flood risk.
Excuse
we
me.
also did look
I
at
have to interrupt for just a minute. Eric, there is no way God's holy. I mean, my father was vice president of Ford Motor Company and a great engineer. So, of course, I come from that background of engineering. And I got to tell you something. If you've got a 90-degree angle of in a flood situation, 90 degrees of water going against the Manoa Stream, it will slow the flow. Again, if you're going to do this thing and make any sense whatsoever, you've got to change the angle of that flow to 45 degrees. It will not work any other way. And also remember, if you're at 90 degrees going into the Alawai, the only opposing force, which is what you talk about with velocity, is force, is the Mackay side of the Alawai Canal, which is not strong enough. I can understand why you want a 6-foot wall there, but if you direct the flow at 45-degree angle, then you're going towards the sea. That's the whole point of my statement. But there's no way you can tell any one of us that a 90-degree angle of water hitting water has no impact upon the flood, because it does. It automatically backs up the flow. The velocity is restricted. Sorry to interrupt, but that was just nuts.
I understand, sir. I appreciate. So anyway, I just want you to know that we did look at those measures. I think all of the measures, and also the tunnels. You had mentioned tunnels. So we did look at multiple different types of tunnels. So very similar tunnels to the oceanic tunnels that were proposed prior. We also looked at kind of additional tunnel-like measures, including kind of upsizing storm sewer systems and trying to expedite water through different conduits underground as well. So I just, want you to know that we did look at those. And I do encourage you, if you haven't already, to go take a look at the management measure tracker spreadsheet online.
I did.
We can, okay. Hopefully all of those measures are there. At least you can find them. It's very long, but if not, you can always follow up with the team. And I did just, in terms of understand the concern about local knowledge. I understand, right, that when you partner with the Corps of Engineers, you don't just you partner with the whole organization, right? So we try to bring regional or national talent while maintaining that local presence and the local knowledge. And so we do have a lot of folks on our team that are from and do live on the island. And so I just I kind of listed it out in the chat earlier. And so we do have local support and we do have local knowledge. And so I did want to say that, but I understand your concern and I appreciate the comment. And
Eric,
I'll stop there.
my concern is the people that are on your team are new. You've gone through 3 different teams and they're all young people, right? There's not one elderly person who has any kind of local knowledge at all. You have young people who are trained on the mainland. I don't think there's one person in your group who has a degree from the University of Hawaii Manoa. But what I know is that this community has seen 3 different teams. You're the newest iteration of a team. And guess what? None of you guys have any kind of corporate memory about what's been going on since 2015. And that concerns me because you're reinventing the wheel one time after another. And for some reason, you think that we're going to buy into this thing and just say, oh, well, these young people know more than we do. I hate to tell you, no, we're not going to buy into that. And you have to admit the fact that even though you are the Army Corps of Engineers, you all make mistakes. I keep a house in California, in Long Beach. Army Corps of Engineers built a breakwater in Long Beach. Now it's a toilet bowl in front of the city, and you won't remove it. And we don't have any power to remove it. So there are no waves in Long Beach, and all we have is a cesspool of the Los Angeles River running into a breakwater that has no exit. So don't tell me the Army Corps of Engineers always does a great job.
Understand. And anyway, there are folks on our team that were involved. I don't know. I'm not meaning to go back and forth. I understand and absolutely respect your concerns and comments. We do have engineers that are coordinating with the team who are lead engineers on the previous iteration. and we do have a project manager on our team who was project manager under the previous iteration, as well as other folks kind of with institutional knowledge. A lot of the leadership at the Honolulu district are engaged, and so but again, I understand the concern, and so I'll stop talking. Over.
My only addition to it is that the purpose of having the talk stories that we're having before we're leading up to this draft report being released is to garner that much perspective. So for all of you who are still here with us, a few minutes over our lunch hour, and especially Laura and Ellen, both of you with your hands up, and to everyone else as well, that's what the purpose of these forums are. And I thank you for being here, Robert Fox. And Laura, I heard you say that you invited Ellen to go first.
Yeah, first, I'm going to have to leave at about 1:25. So if Ellen wants to be first, that's fine. She hasn't spoken yet. I just have a very few quick comments, so I'll meet until then. Okay, Ellen first.
Okay, Ellen, thank you. And thank you, Laura.
Thank you. I would like to see a discussion between what you guys are proposing and Oceanet's plan with Oceanet. I think there should be a forum where Oceanet is present and you're present, because the community liked the Oceanet plan. We liked the tunneling. It made sense. There were no detention basins. There were no walls. They took the water right out to the ocean. They respected what Robert Fox is talking about the caves and the tunnels and bypassing the Alawai altogether. And I have not seen that. I've seen that you've looked at the tunneling and then you don't share the data and then you just ruled it out. And what you're trying to impose on the community is not going to stand for it. We don't want it. I mean, you'll spend this $3 million for nothing, because we'll go to our congressional leaders and tell them not to fund anything, then do nothing, then hurt our island. And I think those of us that have been around a long time and we've been following the Alawai project, since 2014. And I think you just don't get it. And you give us pat answers and you rule natural solutions out. And I think you blow off the community. And we feel that and we know that. And you just keep saying the same things like Army Corps is the smartest guys in the room, and you're not the smartest guys in the room. And, so I think there needs to be a real matchup. I mean, Oceanet did a lot of public outreach. They came out with their report. Their original price tag was like $500 million to do it or whatever. But since there's not appropriation that you're trying to fit into, let it be what it is. And let's see if Congress approves it, because that will work without causing all the destruction that you're proposing. So I want that matchup. I mean, we listened to them, they talked to us, we respected them, they explained everything. And that's real opposite of what you guys are doing. So, I think we have to go back to that. And I want to see them talk to you and you talk to them and tell them why their system won't work, because I think it works. And a large swath of the community thinks it works. So I want you to do that before you come out with your final draft July iteration plan of your hybrid, whatever you're trying to put together. And that's what I think. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can take just a few moments of time, I misspoke. I've actually been watching the water for 43 years. When Hurricane Eva came through, It hit the Waikiki and Ala Moana area, and we went out right after it, and there were easily 10-foot high sand dunes on Ala Moana Park that had come up over, scooped up the sand from under the water and also the beach and deposited inside. Second of all, at the building I live in and the other people live in on the Mauka side are about plus 11 feet above. What's going to happen? Nothing is going to happen if water floods into our open green spaces. And third, I suggested after the 2004 flood at UH, I was on the Landscape Advisory Committee. I suggested a double box drain that goes right through the campus, right along Hamilton Library, and dumps into the quarry. The quarry is also a resource to have water flow directly in there. And I would just have a little bit of course correction with what Bob Fox said, and that is a few things about the underwater caverns, but I will leave that for a later time. And it just, you can look at my book on Mo'ili, The Life of a Community, and it will give you a little more information. So I thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm going to have to leave now because I have another meeting that's coming right up after this. But I thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to the next time out. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And I thank you as well, Ellen. I know that there was some chat back and forth as far as the plans that have been proposed in the past. I know that the measures tracker has a lot of explanation about why things had been considered and screened. At minimum, if we can take this information and be sure to try to make an explanation if there is a strong rationale as to why that might not work. I think at very minimum, when we're presenting in the fall, along with the tentatively selected plan, that's what TSP is that's the abbreviation. I think there's a lot of folks with a lot of history about what proposed ideas like detention basins upstream. There were, things that were favorable or not favorable, and this tunnel concept was also something that had been proposed. So I think we owe it to everyone to try to explain what has been considered in the past, why it didn't get included, or if it is included, what is the purpose of it being included. Eric, I'd love to ask you to maybe put a wrap on the end of today, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot more dialogue going on. I'm leaving this slide up for folks to jot down the email address and continue exchanging information and sharing knowledge. But I do want to give folks a chance to wrap up and move on for their day to day. Eric, anything in closing that you see in chat, or Kelly, anything that you see in chat?
Yeah, so I'll try to close this out really fast and just kind of next steps ahead. So the team is going to continue refining the prospective plan as it was presented last, and then we are going to add one additional public engagement between now and the release of the draft report. So we're anticipating release of the draft report. I see some questions in the chat in late August at the earliest at this point, and it may shift a little bit to the right, but not much beyond that. So late August, very early September timeframe. And so because it has gotten a little bit delayed, we do want to hold one additional meeting open to everybody to kind of, present changes that have been made and allow folks time to take a look at that prior to the release of the draft report. And so again, just really appreciate it, even though Tyson would do my best and Hunter do my best to plug us here, even though the next meeting isn't, so the next meeting will likely be in the late July timeframe, so about a month from now. But even in between now and that next meeting, you can always provide comments to the team through our website. Go to honolulu.gov/alawai, and you can find all of the previous materials from the previous public meetings, ways to engage with the study team, even in between now and the next public meeting. Truly do appreciate all the continued interest and conversation about this, and I really look forward to the next outing and talking with everybody soon.
May I make a request that when you do these presentations, for instance, again, time speaking with people is really the most important thing, Eric. It really, really is. One of the things that's missing in all of your presentations is there's no reasoning behind your statements. You give us little graphs and there's no reasoning behind it. And it's like, we're the kind of people who want to say, okay, what made you think that was an appropriate choice? And we don't have that. I've emailed you. I've emailed the honolulu.gov. I get no answers back. And we're just, so what made you think that Oceanet's plan was not appropriate? What part of that plan didn't scientifically work out for you? I like to use a scientific method when I'm trying to discover something for myself as to whether it's reasonable or not. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't be as successful in my business as I am. So if you're going to be successful in your business, being an Army Corps of Engineers person, I think you owe it to the community to give your explanations about why you chose what you chose, because we don't have that. All we have is, well, this is the best solution. And frankly, it builds distrust and anger. And I think if you want to dissolve anger and mistrust and volatile situations, which will happen, you need to do a better job of explaining why you're choosing the things that you're choosing, and then explain to us why the alternative was not appropriate. I want to see it in metrics. Like if we were like building a car, I want to figure out the metrics of that. So I would really appreciate it if somebody in your team actually explains what went through your heads to come up with this stuff. Can we do that?
Sure, yes, and I too appreciate the scientific method. And so I will take this back to our team and we'll figure out a way. It is a balance, right? So we looked at 234 odd measures. And so there is a balance as to what we present, understanding that, time discussing is the most important thing, and not having us present kind of rationale for all 234. But I will take that comment back, and I appreciate that comment, and it kind of goes back to Mike Elhoff's earlier comment about how we can present this information to folks and have it be understood and accepted, in the best way. And so I appreciate that comment, and we'll take it back and take it to heart and figure out how, maybe it's a handful of measures. And so, one thing that would be helpful is if you wanted to shoot a quick email to the ottawa.gov and maybe with a small, kind of the top plans or measures that you would like to see, we can take that information and try to incorporate it into a presentation that's not overbearing, but does provide answers to kind of the key measures that we did consider. And so, yeah, appreciate that comment. We'll take it back and figure out what we can do.
I think the two most important things that we're having a problem with is your plan versus Oceanet's. I mean, since the communities really supported Oceanet's, I don't care about funding, and I don't care that Tommy Waters pulled the funding. He's not particularly the most popular council person in the world right at the moment, because he just voted in a 64% raise for himself. That did not make him a favored son. So here's my thinking. Why don't you designate one person at least, or maybe a team of 3, look at Oceanet, look at what you've got planned, because you guys are going full tilt boogie, and tell me why Oceanet's plan doesn't work. Because I'm a pretty logical person, and it looks like it works pretty well to me and to others in the community. Could you do that for me?
The answer is yes, and I'll say that we have done that. So what we'll try to do is figure out a way to get that information over to folks who want to hear it. And so absolutely, heard, and we'll take that forward. Over.
And Eric, I see in the chat that Tyson has reiterated this, and once again for Robert Fox and for anyone else who might have joined after I introduced myself at the beginning of today. I'm taking the reins from Tyson to try to help maintain that open door for conversations about things. If there are items that Tyson knows about that I am not aware of, he'll make me aware of them and I can share them for anyone who learned about this talk story from Friday's interview on PBS. I want to welcome you all, and I'm glad that you're here. I will really, again, drive toward that website and that email address so that if I think Jason was the one who mentioned earlier today, hey, I apologize if there was a question that's already been asked. Well, no apologies. I asked the same question. It's okay. I'm really encouraging folks that are coming in to learn about this to ask those questions. That said, we're well over our hour, but but I'll be the last person to stay on for this, unless Eric or Kelly or Haku or Cindy or Tyson as well. If you have anything else, now's the time to mention it. Other than that, I'm going to allow folks to depart and say goodbye on your chat. And this is being recorded, so I just want to offer that this and other things that we've had discussions on are things we can revisit and try to learn from as well. So thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone, actually. And Eric, thanks for letting me facilitate today. So I'll be the last one out of the room.
Okay.
Thank you guys for your efforts to reach out. It's very much appreciated. Have a good day.
Thank you, Matthew.